Yeah, I think it's probably good to go back and revisit our past and reconcile whatever needs reconciling. I didn't dare move to Kentucky until most of my family was gone. You know, it's like, oh, I don't want to take on that dysfunction. I just soon keep my distance. Now, it's allowed me to make my peace with a lot of parts of my past.
Kinsey has traveled just a little. Which was the book where she was the hotel maid?
That was Alice for Lawless, yeah. And in fact, I just went to Houston, and I believe it's Houston, or it might have been Dallas, probably Dallas, Texas, and saw the hotel that allowed me to do that research in the back areas of the hotel. So Alice for Lawless is what I consider a cross-country rom.
Right.
There isn't really a murder. It's about a crime that comes to the fore again 40 years later. And it's just a cross-country romp. It's great fun. It's a caper. I just love doing it.
But Kinsey doesn't normally travel far from Santa Barbara, so are you going to keep that separate from your life in Kentucky?
Yeah, perhaps. Well, she goes to Kentucky at the end of Alice for Lawless, and I think she goes in O.S. for Outlaw. She goes back there. But I'm a kind of practical person. If she goes to Louisville, I don't have to do the research, or I can do it while I'm there. If she went to Bangkok, daggone it, I just have to go to Bangkok, which I don't want to do. So part of it is just expediency.
Well, she's not a cop, so it isn't that her authority is derived from being part of the Santa Teresa Police Department. I mean, I think that police procedurals, almost by definition, are rooted in one place.
Well, even private eyes, as I understand it, I would have to learn Kentucky state criminal law. I would have to understand all the regulations that apply to private investigators. I don't think they're interchangeable. I think if you do business in another state, there are things you need to make sure you're...
Sure. Yeah. So really, it would almost have to be a chase after a crime from California or something. But speaking of Santa Barbara, I mean, there's a couple long shadows in Santa Barbara. You can't really duck Ross McDonald if you're in Santa Barbara.
I wouldn't want to. I was privileged to meet him twice.
Oh, lucky you.
Yeah. But I was probably 25, you know, and I wasn't writing mysteries at that point, and I understood he was an amazing man and an amazing writer. But it wasn't like we chatted about anything, you know, it's hi, how are you, and on to the next. So, but it is still important to me that I knew who he was. He was the one who named Santa Barbara Santa Teresa.
Right.
And I thought, well, hey, if it's good enough for him, it'll work for me too.
So there, Tom Nolan, who was a critic a long time, Wall Street Journal, in fact, I'm not sure that he still isn't, wrote a biography of McDonald, and you wrote the introduction, if I remember right.
That was one of those instances I was asked to do it, and I thought, I owe that to Ross McDonald in the mystery field. I don't always feel that kind of obligation, but I thought this is important to address this man in the context of his work.
Well, I mean, your work is not an homage to McDonald at all, but at the same time, I think, you know, writing in that place that was so intrinsically his, you'd always sort of have at the back of your mind how Lew Archer functioned. And, you know, Lew Archer was also a guy where there wasn't a lot of personal life. He certainly didn't have romance. I mean, Kinsey and Lew are, in many ways, sort of
Well, I think in those days, the detective did not have a lot of dimension. The detective would often just go about his business, but you did not get much information about his personal life, and it was usually a his in those days.
Right.
And I do think that's shifted, and I think it's Marcia Muller, Sarah Paretsky, and I that blew that open and allowed, with a feminine sensibility, I think, to look at people with more complexity and to understand them in the context. So I think that opened up the territory for guys, too, to start looking at their male characters with more dimension.
Oh, I think so, too. And oftentimes I find in series today, like let's take Michael Connelly, for example. Harry Bosch did his first 3 books, and they were really basically, you know, serial killer chases and all. But because he had set up some things for Harry in his personal life, book 4 is about Harry, like James Ellroy, investigating the murder of his own mother. And that had actually gone into the book at book 1 and then was kind of waiting. I'm finding in almost all long-term series there comes a point in which the sleuth has to investigate his or her own past. And it's because all that stuff, you have to make them interesting enough that readers bond to them.
Yes.
And that almost inevitably produces a backstory that then the author feels wants to follow.
Exactly.
And, you know, with Kinsey, I think yours was longer coming, but as you pointed out, if you was going to go that way, then you too are going to be doing that. G is for Grafton was a 1997 study, if I remember. It was kind of a biography, kind of a literary whatever. Do you envision something similar coming along? I mean, now it's 10 years, 10 years old.
G is for G is for Grafton, excuse me, is a biography of Kinsey Milhone, who's a fictional character. And I'm thinking, nobody has done my biography. How come she gets all the attention? But that
well, it was about you. Come on. She's not a totally separate individual.
Those were 2 scholars from the University of South Carolina, one in political science, one in English, Carol McGinnis Kay and Natalie Hevnan Kaufman, as I recollect. We heard they were doing this book, and I thought, oh, please. Academia, snore, boring, detached, too intellectualized. So I thought I better read these pages just to see how much trouble
it was.
Yeah. I'm reading these 100 pages, and I thought, these women understand what I was doing. It's like, thank you. Somebody gets what I'm up to. So I invited them to California, opened my house, opened my files, invited them to Kentucky. They had free access to everything about me. And I think they did a fabulous job.
It was a good book. It won an Edgar, if I remember right, for Best Critical Biographical
Now, whether we need to
work.
do, I think that book has been slightly updated to cover Emmis for Malice, which was the 13th book.
Right.
So we do have these 13 other books trailing out here, but I don't know that that'll happen.
Well, I was thinking, it might be part of the wrap-up, so to speak.
Yeah,
I mean, it probably works better to wait till Z.
Right, exactly.
But I do think at some point, it would be there are a number of books that are concordances or companions or other things to a really long-running series, and there's an awful lot about this series, stuff from the cases themselves, stuff from Kinsey, stuff about you, whatever it is, that you can't really deal with it in depth in the individual books. I mean, nothing slows a book down more than having some long... I mean, for example, the book about Tourette's syndrome. You couldn't really... Was that Jay that he came in? When does the guy come in?
Which was the...
Wasn't it Tourette's in one?
Oh, that was H's for Homicide.
Okay.
Right.
But, I mean, you had a component of this odd disease, and you had the character. Now, well, you can't really, at the end, write something about Tourette's and how you researched it and all the rest of it. But there's just stuff in every book about, you're actually becoming a hotel maid long enough to write about.
So much fun.
Well, and talk about punishing work.
Yeah.
I mean, those people really have physically an enormous burden.
I know, absolutely.
So there's all kinds of things in all of the books that, would be interesting in a sort of a companion or concordance.
That's one of the things, and I've said this often, I don't want to write the same book 26 times.
Right.
So every time I go up at bat, it's like, how can I come at this from a different direction? What turf can I cover? How can I shape this book so it doesn't echo 2 other books in the series? And that keeps my hair turning gray, honey.
Have you had some really panicky moments when you couldn't see that it was just not going to come together and a deadline was coming?
Yes, I have writer's block at least once a day. I am persistent. I'm a slow writer, but I am persistent. That's how I get where people think I'm prolific. I'm not. 25 years I've written 20 books, which does sound kind of productive, actually, when you think about it.
Well, it is productive. Was it after M you decided that you wanted to take 18 months or so between books? I remember you slowed down deliberately at some point.
I had to negotiate with my publisher. I just said, I can't do a book a year. This is insane. I'm a good Girl Scout, and I'll hit my deadlines, but a day is going to come when I'll wake up and say it's over, and I might not be at Z is for zero, so give me some space here, and they very graciously did.
Well, part of that's the writing process, and then part of that is that it does take a chunk out of your year to actually go out and promote the book, and no successful published writer today can can afford to ignore
That's right.
that part of the
That's right.
business. I mean, it just doesn't work to just write
But
books in your ivory tower and push them out the door.
Exactly. Well, you know, you can write a book or you can promote a book. I don't know how to do both at the same time.